Hey everyone, I'm going to give you the little consent talk that I do as you all walk in.
That was Paige, Alpha Chi Omega's risk manager, about to give a consent talk to members before they enter a fraternity event.
I went to visit my brother at Berkeley. He's a fourth year there, he's a senior, and ever since he got to school there, they've had a thing such as consent talks. And I had heard him tell my mom and I that he had been giving them before, where every single person who comes into the event will receive the same little spiel, essentially outlining the pillars of consent.
I was able to talk to Paige's brother, Max, about his experience giving consent talks at Berkeley.
I mean, it's a requirement for every fraternity to give them for events, and the risk managers for each chapter, they're in charge of making sure all the new members and brothers know the consent talk in and out, and then they're in charge of assigning whoever gives the consent talks. And more often than not, at least for our chapter, it's the sexual assault prevention point. Like when we go to events at other schools, it's weird to not have them. But I mean, like, as you know, it's not uncommon for people who meet at a social event in college, let alone in Greek life, to like have a sexual experience after. So it's very important to us at Cal, at least, that everyone is hyper aware of what consent is and what's going on.
After learning about consent talks from her brother and how Berkeley students reacted, Paige knew she wanted to bring it to Cal Poly.
Decided first to try it out within Alpha Chi Omega as a sorority at Cal Poly's campus instead of going straight to Greek life as a whole, because I didn't know how my chapter was going to react to it, how my committee was going to react, how fraternities usually are the other groups we do things with, how they would react. And it was really successful. I first brought it up to my committee and I had all of their support. I brought it up to my executive board and they thought it was a fantastic idea. And then I did some research on Cal Poly Safer's website because I figured, if I'm reading things to people that are factual, I'm going to want to get it from Cal Poly's resources that everyone has access to. Yeah, I just made a little document. I tested it out, and we've been going strong from there.
This past Thursday, Alpha Chi Omega had an exchange with the fraternity Beta Theta Pi. I spoke to Griffin, the risk manager, about his feelings on the consent talks.
Having Paige reach out was like a pretty good wake-up call so that we could oh shoot, we need to start doing that and get on board on the consent talks. And everybody thought it was a good idea, and we had wanted to do it before, but it never really happened. So it was a good starting point.
While Beta Theta Pi was all for the talks, one fraternity did have some hesitations.
The president of the fraternity was not in support of it, and I really tried to dive into why. And ultimately, I was told that I wasn't allowed to do it at the event. I asked so many times why and why it wasn't appropriate. And the answer that I consistently received throughout the phone call was that it was not the time or place. And then also throughout the phone call, the verbiage that was used by this individual changed from "it's not the time or place" to "in my opinion, I don't feel comfortable with this."
I reached out to the fraternity president mentioned here, only to receive no response. However, he did eventually allow Paige to give the consent talks before the event. However, like in this case, not all fraternities are keen to take consent talks seriously, as shared by Max.
I went to a couple events where they either had a pledge give it and they just forgot, or the brother doing it was hammered, and they would tell the women at the door, who I would hope were their friends, but just the complete polar opposite of what consent was, because they thought it was funny. They say consent is optional, intoxicated, confusing, and not mandatory. And I was wow, that just happened.
While consent talks are still a work in progress, Paige is actively working to make them the norm here at Cal Poly.
I think that it should be a standard throughout all of Greek life, because if we're looking at Berkeley, one of the most progressive institutions in our country, clearly they've been doing this for years, and I'm honestly embarrassed that Cal Poly has never even made a start to doing something like this, because I don't know, I feel like it's such an important thing that we should be able to talk about freely without getting backlash from anyone or from...
Okay, so consent is freely given. Consenting is a choice you make without pressure, manipulation, or under the influence of any drugs or alcohol. It's reversible. Anyone can change their mind at any point about anything. Informed, you can only consent to something if you have the full story of what's going to happen. Enthusiastic, when it comes to sex, you should only do stuff that you actually want to do. And then specific, saying yes to one thing does not mean saying yes to everything. If you need anything at all, please come find myself or my president. We'll be at the door. And I appreciate you listening. Thank you.